Great to be here. Lots of familiar faces in the chat and lots of new people to say hello to as well. So what I'm planning to do is just to give a quick overview of the kind of why and some of the things that are included in our integrated impact assessment. I won't go through every slide in huge detail, but as Ariane said, I'm happy to share them afterwards and let everyone see what's going on. So in terms of the driver for us, so Laura mentioned my job title, which sounds incredibly boring, but there's some really interesting parts of that. One of them is strategic planning for the council in terms of the council plan, and that's what's up there, but also things like trauma, community planning, housing strategy, child poverty. So a lot of the things that we're talking about today, a lot of those cross-cut agendas. So when we were developing our council plan, with help from David, actually, who's on the call as well from the Improvement Service, we were looking to see how, we did the usual, we consult with members, and we consult with communities, and we try and work out what's important. And we could have just had a council plan that was involved in, which was focused solely on potholes and dog fouling, but we didn't think that gave it the reach that we wanted to. So these are the things that we come up with, and we were working with the Improvement Service again, actually, on the Shaping Places for Wellbeing programme, and we come up with a sort of adjusted version of the place and wellbeing outcomes. And so we've got 3 priorities around spaces and places, live, work, learn, civic and community pride, and below those we've got some priorities that we want to work to. Now, really what our council plan is there to do is provide a framework for collaboration and that understanding that we can't really achieve all that much either as our own individual siloed departments, but likewise, even as a local authority in our own right, we need to be working with partners, we need to be working across the system to try and achieve that. Now, the plan was approved, we're all very happy with it, we've got action plans coming from it, we've got reporting, but the thing that really strikes me in it is there's so many important things missing from that. So many of those national policy agendas that we're not really referencing, and so many local things that we said are really important locally that we aren't really referencing. So the challenge for us was how do we make sure that we consider that as part of what we're doing, but rather than it being a project, trauma shouldn't just be a project, it should be embedded in everything that we do. Likewise, child poverty, things that we should be considering in all our policy areas. The reality is that we don't right now, because local government is complicated. There's lots of different things going on, lots of different policy agendas, lots of different guidance and reporting networks that we've got to adhere to. And it's not surprising that our estates manager isn't particularly up with the trauma-informed agenda or with the UNCRC. That's just the reality of it. But also the reality of it for us was, if you work in local government, you need to understand this stuff, because the decisions you make can have that impact further down the line. Those unintended consequences of the decisions that you make without having that policy agenda at the forefront of your mind can be actually detrimental to what we're trying to achieve. Now, I've thrown in the next slide, we were developing our child poverty strategy last year, and we did some mapping of the system, and this is what we come up. So this was a fictitious family in an area in Ayr, and we tried to map some of the interventions, and you can see I can't fit it all on a slide, but that gives a hint of some of the complexity that we're working to, and some of the complexity that our residents and our communities are working with as well, trying to navigate. So we need something that tries to pull these things together, and I think there's a big role for public sector reform in that, because somebody mentioned the duplication that's involved, and I think that's a real issue, because we're all falling over each other to provide similar services. But this slide has been a real catalyst for sort of reform in South Ayrshire. We're working with, I don't know if anyone Donna Hall, who was responsible for the Wigan deal, chief exec down there, and so we're working with her about how we can do sort of, we call it radical place leadership in public sector reform, but that's probably a different presentation. But I just wanted to bring this in just to show the complexity of the system, and that's just one small element of it, but it's a pretty complex system. So how do we make sense of that? How do we make sure we're all pulling in the same direction? So we agreed in the council plan, actually, we said that we're going to look at an integrated impact assessment. It's something that I've been chatting about for a while, and we had a few attempts at maybe putting some things online, but really we were just replicating a paper form in an online system, so it wasn't really giving us any sort of real impact. But we managed to get agreement from members that we wanted a more joined up approach to tackling these strategic challenges, and also when it came to equalities impact assessments and Fairer Scotland duty impact assessments, we weren't particularly good at them. And I'm sure everyone has experience of this being a bit of a tick box exercise rather than something that people really take seriously. It's thrown in at the end of a process, or sometimes it's not done at all. And what we found was even when it was done well, our members didn't really take that much of an interest. The odd one would, but generally people were more considered about the content of the paper rather than the impact that it was going to have across maybe protected characteristics. So we thought that we could actually try and improve the scrutiny of members to understand the impact that some of these decisions they were making, but likewise, I suppose, protect officers as well, in that sense that members are fully aware of the impact of the decisions they're making. They can't come back, a few months later, you never told us this bit, sort of thing. So it gets all those those conversations out into the open. So we come up with the draft of it just over a year ago, and we got it approved, and we've been testing it for a few months, or 6 months there, but actually it's been way longer than that now. It's been over a year, and just last month we got approval from Cabinet for the final version. So we rolled it out to one directorate first of all to kind of test it, and had a few goes at it, and made a few amendments to it. Actually, it was really useful. But now it's rolled out within the entire council and Health and Social Care Partnership. So this is what we're working to, and we're starting to see them coming through in panel papers at the moment. So in terms of what's been assessed, so it's pretty similar to what you would use an equalities impact assessment. But interestingly enough, this has thrown up a few kind of questions about should we be doing it all the time? And I'm very conscious that this is a wee bit of extra work and everyone's very busy. So we don't want to grind the decision-making process to a halt. But what we're trying to do is I suppose, improve the literacy of people in a lot of these topics that they just don't have access to. So even when you're not required to complete the full impact assessment, we're hoping by having been through it a few times that you actually begin to understand these areas a bit better and can pay due regard in your everyday decision making. So this is the slide I use. So for people, some people are really on board with this because they see of trying to join up that complex system and the importance of it, and some people just see it as a bit of a pain. So this is the slide we use to scare people essentially, and it's about the judicial review. And I know there's a lot of local authorities are under judicial review at the moment for decisions that they made, because we're all having to make really difficult decisions right now, and communities aren't happy with them. In the first place they will go is, did you do an equalities impact assessment? Did you do your consultation properly? And if you didn't, you're in a hiding to nothing. So we use this slide to try and sort of scare people into saying this is so important to do, because if you think this is a wee bit of extra work now, wait till you've got to actually respond to judicial review and go through all that process, because that will just suck up all your time. So what we do is part of this, so I suppose to give you an idea of what it looks like, the integrated impact assessment. So it's a spreadsheet, and it's got various tabs down the bottom that cover the different topic areas that we're looking at. Spreadsheets get kind of drop-down menus and different sections to fill out, but it should be quite straightforward, and I'll show you the kind of drop-downs in the next slide. But really, this is the section we look at. What's your evidence? Why have you decided to do this? And what's driven this? And again, when you're getting questioned or when people are putting pressure on you as to why you're making a decision, then you can really evidence it there. And you should be doing that anyway as part of an equality impact assessment. The reality was people weren't doing it, and we were leaving ourselves open. This is like a quick section from it. So what you see on the left-hand side, you get from the equalities impact assessment side of it, you've got the age, protected characteristic. So the impact rating, you've got 4 options. You get positive, negative, no impact. And the one we added in after the testing phase requires further research, because what we realise is quite a lot of times you don't really know, and that's okay not to know, but you can't just ignore it then. So that's the options that you get. You've got to explain why you selected one of those options, which is new for us as well, because the amount of impact assessments that we saw that just said no impact, and then there was no reason to justify that was really quite challenging. Where it's a negative impact or where it requires further information, you've got to put in a mitigation. So if it's a negative impact, are you going to mitigate against that negative impact? If it requires further information, what are you going to do to go and find that information? So that brings that accountability to the decision-making process. what will happen is if you've got any mitigations from the requires more information or red, then that automatically will feed through into our Pintana reporting system, and you'll get an action that has to be followed up, and that will be monitored by the service and by a reporting schedule that goes to one of our panels every 6 months, just to see what impact we're having. So once you went through it, at the end of it, it should give you this summary. Now, this is the summary that will be attached to panel papers. So we're trying to make it very visual for members, so you can look at that, and that shows you the areas that we're covering. On the right-hand side, the top right is our protected characteristics and our Fairer Scotland duty, with one addition in there. We've adopted care experience as a protected characteristic, and that's part of our commitment to the promise. And then on the bottom, we call them info donuts. I don't know if that will ever take on, but yeah, info donuts. So you'll see the kind of environmental ones on the outside, and then the cross-cutting agenda items that we look at in the middle. So I'll talk through kind of each one of those, but you'll see what we've got there is a really visual tool for members and decision makers to see where we're having those positive impacts and pull out where those negative impacts are. So this was the one from our Aging Well strategy that we did recently. So you can see no negative impacts, and you wouldn't expect negative impacts from a sort of strategy like that. But interestingly, it pulled out some uncertain, not clear ones, which probably wouldn't have been discussed otherwise. So in terms of rurality, climate communication, things like that, things that we want to know about, things that we think we need to consider, but they were pulled out in that. So I think we've already begun to find that a useful exercise. Behind the info donuts is the summary reports that should pull out any mitigations and will again help with that transparency in what we're doing. On the right hand side, it's the child rights impact assessment summary. So I think that's probably one of the biggest changes in terms of adding the child rights impact assessment into it. So not everyone will have to do that, but it's quite involved and quite challenging, all the different articles. You know, it takes quite a lot to navigate and understand. But what we'll do is that should come through in the summary, but there's more detail in the actual impact assessment itself. So these are the areas that we've decided to look at. So we've got our statutory ones, public sector equality duty, human rights and Fairer Scotland, UNCRC, but areas where we feel that we've got to take due regard and due consideration for it as part of our own local policy agenda and that national policy agenda. So we've included about 10 questions on sustainability, climate change and biodiversity, and that was because we realised we weren't doing particularly well in embedding that agenda across the organisation. Older people, rural communities, health and wellbeing, trauma and the promise. So we'll talk about each one in a wee bit more detail. So equalities, so again, I don't really have to go into too much detail. So this is the public sector equality duty. And as I said, it was a real mixed bag in South Ayrshire on how well we were doing this. And not only does it make our decision-making poorer, but it leaves us open to challenge as well on what we're trying to do. So really trying to put a bit more enthusiasm and momentum behind those statutory duties as well. So CRIA, for sure, Children Rights and Wellbeing Impact Assessment. So we've been working closely with our education colleagues as part of the UNCRC and how we bring this into part of the sort of online spreadsheet document to do it. So again, it's understanding how other parts of the system are impacting on children and young people. Now, there's a sort of screening part to this first, so you can go through it. If you don't think it is going to have that impact, then you usually don't have to go through the full assessment. But if you think it is going to have that direct impact on children, then the full assessment's there. So again, the purpose of this is about where there's a direct and indirect impact on children, where those impacts will differ compared to adults, how we're going to mitigate it, and what evidence have we used to do that. So this has been a big change for us, but it's a big change that everyone's having to face at the moment. So it was actually quite good timing. Just when we were developing this, we thought, well, it was well taking advantage of that timing and bringing the CRIA to be part of it. Sustainability, climate change and nature. So again, these are the areas that we have statutory duties around, but not to report on in quite the same way or impact assess. But we thought this is a good opportunity to bring that and make that part of our policy agenda and discussions, and make sure that we're not inadvertently hampering our ability to meet those climate change duties and wildlife and nature conservation duties, etc. So again, it's about improving the literacy in the organisation around that, climate literacy in particular. Trauma informed, so it's been a big part of my role for the last 5 years, and Angie Pinkerton's on the call as well, who's doing a fantastic job of trying to embed that in the council. But we're very conscious it needs to be more than just training, so it needs to be part of our decision-making process. So once again, it's in there, it's one question, but what's really useful is you've got the question, you've got the drop-down menu, but at the right-hand side of the document, there's guidance that talks you through how what you're doing could have an impact on these various areas, and particularly trauma, with links to people to go and see sort of smaller training units or information. So we're really hoping to weave that through our organisation. We've got a lot of buy-in to it, but it's a busy landscape, it's a cluttered landscape. So trying to make sure that we get the things that we want to see part of it. The promise, again, the council's really committed to the promise, and we'll do a lot of great work around it. But it was, it just wasn't in the council plan. It's in the law, but it wasn't in the council plan. So how do we make sure it's not just a project that we're doing, a one-off, or we've done the promise? How do we make sure it's part of our everyday thinking, and we're not inadvertently causing issues further down the line when we make decisions? Ageing population. So this one is probably, I know everyone has the challenges of an ageing population, but in South Ayrshire, we're right at the forefront of it. So we've got one of the highest dependency ratios in Scotland and the UK, actually, and we've got more 80-year-olds than Japan now per capita. So we're one of the oldest populations in the world. So this is a big strategic challenge for us, but it's really only an agenda that's taken forward by the Health and Social Care Partnership, but actually it needs to be part of everything that we're doing. It needs to be part of these conversations we have around estates, around grounds maintenance, around housing. We need to make sure that we're considering this in everything that we do. So that's why we've got an ageing population in there. It's a particular issue in South Ayrshire. Health and wellbeing. So health and wellbeing was in the old impact assessment, actually, but no one really took it on or give it a wee tick and not really explain it. Now, in an ideal world, I would like to have a health impact assessment included in it. But there's got to come a time where you've got to say no to some things because it's already quite a big document and quite challenging for people as it is. So we had to sort of limit this down just as sort of a more generalised question. But again, it's still making sure that people are thinking about these things as a part of their everyday decision making and not as a kind of one-off. And another one we just added in for us, so we're a kind of semi-rural local authority, we've got 5 towns, but quite a lot of rural villages and whatnot. And this was particularly relevant to me when we were doing our child poverty strategy. We did lots of engagement with lived experience and actually seen how differently poverty hits in towns compared to rural communities. And actually, we have rural members who kind of bang the drum and say, we're ignored, and I get where they're coming from on that, because sometimes they can not quite ignored, but sometimes you can kind of skip by the impacts of what it be in particular rural areas, and it does hit differently. So we need to make sure we're thinking about that when we're developing policy. So just in terms of how it works, so it's on a SharePoint site that we have, and it's centrally saved. So the idea is there's now a bank of them. So everyone who does one, it'll be saved centrally. So you've got that opportunity to go and look at other people's and sort of learn from good practice and cut and paste if you think people have worded things particularly well. Also, you can reuse ones that you've done before. So if you're working in a particular area, you don't have to go through the whole thing every single time. You can kind of adjust ones that you've done previously. What we're trying to encourage, and what should have been happening with the qualities impact assessments, was that when you start looking at a process, when you start developing a policy or a strategy or a project, that's when you should be doing your impact assessment. But as I said before, it was something that was kind of thrown in at the end. So what we're trying to do is that instead of trying to do all the impact assessment at once, it should be something that's a live document as you progress through. And the idea of these impact assessments is it's meant to influence what you do and what the final decision or what the final product is going to look like, not just at the end. So that's what we're hoping to do, is trying to encourage that. So what should happen is, as soon as somebody starts it, somebody downloads it, there's an oversight group, so the development group that involved colleagues from all over the organisation on the particular areas of expertise have now become an oversight group. So they're there as that sort of critical friend to come and help people, but also to offer their skills and expertise in areas where people aren't quite as sure. So we've been doing briefing sessions on it with staff, mixed reviews. I'm not going to lie, people see it as a bit of a burden, but that's okay. We're trying to be quite brave with this because we realise it's the right thing to do, and we've got the buy-in from senior leadership and from members on it. So we're trying to be supportive as we can with it. One of the big benefits of this as well is we'll be able to monitor much better our collective impact on certain areas, whereas before we would do an impact assessment and then it would just be done and that would it, and nobody would ever look at it again. Even if there was mitigations, there was no real accountability for those mitigations. But what we'll hopefully be able to do now is try and get a sense of where we're having an overall positive impact on particular groups, how many policies and strategies have a positive impact on things, but also where those negative impacts, okay, we can maybe do some mitigations for some of the negative impacts, but what if it's the same group being negatively impacted every time? Now we'll be able to gather that and say, well, actually, there's an accumulative negative impact happening on this group. And one of the examples I'll use is where we didn't notice it when austerity first came in and we started cutting, actually older women were disproportionately affected by that in terms of we cut cleaning, we cut facilities, we cut school meals, and actually it was disproportionately older women, but we couldn't see that in our documentation because it was all individual departments doing their own individual wee bit. So hopefully we can beginning to get that better sense of the whole effect that we're having rather than just on individual areas. So what we'll do is we'll report this to our Service and Partnerships Performance Panel every 6 months, just to give an oversight of the impact that we're making and how big the uptake has been on it. So we're conscious that this is new to a lot of people, it's new to us. We don't expect them to all be great at the start, but we expect us as an organisation to get better at them as we go, and hopefully, as I say, improve that overall literacy on these cross-cutting agenda items and make sure that our decision-making is improved, not just for the big strategic decisions, but also for the day-to-day decisions and project decisions that we're making. So that was a very quick overview of where we are, and I'm happy to take any questions.